Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. I've been having a really hard time writing this video. As you can probably tell from the title, I was not a fan of Poppy Playtime Chapter 5. I think it was a really disappointing chapter, and it actually makes me kind of upset. Because Poppy was a series I really cared about, and at this point it just feels like they're wasting all the good ideas they have for no reason. So I wanted to make an in-depth video talking about my problems with the chapter, kind of like I did with Chapter 4. But the problem is that every time I tried to write that, I'd get so mad about the wasted potential and about Poppy Playtime that I'd have to walk away and calm down for like half an hour, because every time I tried to think critically about this game, I'd find something new to be mad about. So here's what we're gonna do. Clearly, at this time, I can't go over everything that bothers me, so instead, I'm going to pick 3 specific things to talk about, and we'll just focus on those. And the 3 things I'll be talking about are shallow story, the prototype's design, and style without substance. The names are probably pretty self-explanatory, and if not, we'll get into them in more detail in just a second. Poppy Playtime was an important franchise to me. I got really hooked at the start because it had interesting character designs and a seemingly interesting story with lots of room to grow. But as time has gone on, it's felt more and more like the series just wasn't going to take advantage of the good ideas it had. And to me, Chapter 5 just proved that feeling right, and it feels like a slap in the face from a franchise I used to be really fond of. I hope this video can help to explain my conflicted and hurt feelings at least a little bit, since I am apparently feeling too raw to do a deep dive right now. Spoiler warning for all of Poppy Playtime and especially Chapter 5, and a general warning that this video will probably be a bit more negative than usual for me. Also, this chapter has a lot of the same problems as Chapter 4, so I'll probably end up repeating some of the points from my previous video. With all of that said, I think it's time we get started. Grab a snack, some water, and make yourself comfortable. Come with me as I try and explain, at least a little bit, why this chapter disappointed me so much. The story of Poppy Playtime is the thing that originally got me interested in the series. Things were pretty bare bones for the first chapter or 2, but even then, there were some interesting mysteries to look into. Sure, a lot of the concepts were similar to what we'd seen before in other Mascot horror games, but there was enough going on that it seemed like Poppy Playtime could grow into something that was truly unique and special. 4 chapters later, and that growth seems to be completely non-existent. The chapters have gotten bigger and more names have been thrown around, but in terms of actual meaningful story, there's not a lot here. It's been 4 chapters and we still have no idea who we are, why we're here, and why we should care about anything that's happening. And now I know that might seem a little bit harsh because clearly we have more information than we did at the start. But that's the problem. What we're given, time and time again, is more information. We have new names, new locations, new characters, without the game ever taking the time to make us care about any of it. These new reveals don't mean anything if the game doesn't have an emotional backbone to support it. There are plot points here that could theoretically be meaningful, but they're presented with all the depth of a Wikipedia summary. In fact, if you read the Wikipedia summary of this game's lore, you'd probably get kind of excited, because it sounds really good on paper, but the actual game itself doesn't add any new depth in its storytelling, because it's so focused on the mysteries of the past that it forgets that it needs to do something to get us invested right now. Let's look at some of the stuff revealed in this chapter, like the fact that the immortality goo is plant-based. Theoretically, this is an interesting piece of world building, but it doesn't mean anything for the actual gameplay and story of the chapter. I originally thought that Lily Lovebraids was going to have more of a plant theme, like her hair was made of constantly growing vines, and she'd give us some insight into the possible consequences of this weird toy-based immortality. But that wasn't the case, and she has nothing to do with the plants. It's just horsehair and finger bones and stuff, which is creepy, but then what was the point of this new plant insight? This information is fine and interesting in a vacuum, but it doesn't mean anything for the wider context of the chapter. Why is there a whole area dedicated to this idea when it means nothing for what we're actually doing? It feels like something included to get people excited for the next chapter and future mob projects, when the chapter should be focusing on being interesting in and of itself. Another reveal that didn't really mean anything to me is the brainwashing and conditioning of the children. Again, in a vacuum, this is a very creepy and horrifying concept, and I think the sections where we explore Huggy's memories are really well done. Except that this is the third time that a chapter has chosen to focus on how much deeper the evil goes when it comes to Playtime Co. Chapter 3 was the first. We get to see the actual orphanage the children are coming from, and the chapter takes time to show us through VHS tapes and chapter events that this was a deeply horrific operation that preyed on the trust these children had for their caretakers. That's good horror, and it effectively showed us why the toys thought an hour of joy type event would be necessary. And then chapter 4 basically did the same thing, deeper underground in a less interesting environment. Which could have worked, probably. I have my own problems with the chapter, as I've talked about in the past, but the idea of exploring the children's suffering after they were turned into toys isn't the worst one. We saw what led to their transformations in chapter 3, and now we're seeing what they had to go through after those transformations. I can see how one would lead to another in terms of story. By the time you get to chapter 5, though, it just starts to feel a little ridiculous. We don't need to see how much deeper the evil goes. In fact, if we go any deeper, we'll be tunneling through the Earth's core. We've been exposed to these children's suffering for 3 chapters now. It's not scary anymore, it's just redundant. And how exactly they're suffering doesn't matter as much as why they're suffering, which is a question that the game is still hesitant to completely answer. The scientists we hear from talk about how this is necessary, how all of this will be worth it in the end, how they're doing good work here, but they are consistently and frustratingly vague about what it is they're trying to accomplish. Yes, I know, technically we're aware that they're trying to achieve immortality by putting people in toy bodies, but that is a very bland, watered-down description of this motivation. Every single one of the people working here should be here for their own reasons, and it would give the game a lot of depth and flavor if we could actually hear what those reasons are. What motivated these people to commit atrocities in the name of blanket term science? Maybe Dr. White's mother died young from an aggressive form of cancer, and he thinks that this research could be used to save people in those situations. Maybe Preston originally worked in child development, and he sees this as a way for children with incurable diseases to get a new body and a second chance at life. Maybe Laith Pierre thinks that the toy bodies are superior to human ones, and this is the next stage of evolution they should try for. Any one of these ideas could be interesting if explored, but instead the chapter, and the game as a whole, decides to do nothing. Because apparently keeping the story vague and mysterious is more important than telling a good story. And part of the way that Poppy Playtime keeps that lore mysterious is by only dropping plot-relevant details in VHS tapes or notes. And that's okay to a certain point, but now that we're in Chapter 5, it's starting to become really weird that characters don't just talk about things with each other. In this chapter, the identity of the prototype is finally revealed. It turns out that he's what remains of Oliver Ludwig, Poppy's adopted sibling, who was used as a sort of test draft to try and bring Poppy back from the dead. This is revealed to us in an audio tape of the prototype and Elliot Ludwig talking. Which, sure, okay, you can do that. That could be a decent way to reveal things. Except not only is this tape somewhat hidden, and you need to go out of your way to find it, but this extremely important and compelling information does not come up anywhere else. Poppy and the prototype have a direct confrontation in this chapter, and somehow this information doesn't come up in any way whatsoever. I didn't even know that this reveal happened until I was doing further research for this video, because the person I watched just didn't find the tape. Why would you only have the reveal here, stuffed in a corner behind a box where you can easily walk past it? That's just crazy to me. Why don't Poppy and the prototype talk about the fact that they had the same dad? The fact that these two are siblings should have come up in their conversation at Lily's tea party, but it just never does. Instead, we just continue to get the same repetitive statements about how the two of them are connected and the same, which, number one, is kind of boring at this point, and number two, doesn't make sense. This is the reveal, the big moment we've been building towards. This is where we finally get to see what this guy looks like after literal years. So why is he still talking like he's an off-screen voice in a previous chapter? Why don't we get any insight into how these characters feel about each other in this pivotal moment? Sure, the prototype seems surprised for some reason when Poppy breaks under his fingers, and he's adamant that no one touch her except him, but that's all we get. There's no mention of how these two are related, even though the chapter is more than happy to reveal it in an audio tape at a different point. The fact that they don't talk about their shared history makes the encounter confusing, because does Poppy not even know what their connection is? She's only ever referred to the prototype as prototype, and the betrayal in Chapter 4 only really works if she saw Ollie and the prototype as separate entities. So I guess she's also in the dark, but if she doesn't know, wouldn't this be the perfect time to tell her? Why isn't it something that he brings up? He's been trying to get her to understand his point of view for apparently years at this point, so why not pull out your trump card when you finally have her trapped? This is supposed to be the prototype's big moment, so why isn't he just laying everything out? What possible benefit could there be to revealing his backstory in a tape instead of right here? From a storytelling standpoint, I feel like it would be just objectively better to reveal it at this tea party, because then you can get the reactions from all the characters we theoretically care about. But no, my bad, I guess it was just so important that it's a revelation in a random audio tape you can completely miss. And this really gets to me, because the story and relationship of the prototype and Poppy is very compelling on paper. Like so many things in this chapter, this is something that could be interesting that they just don't do anything with. Oliver was a child used by his father to figure out how to bring Poppy back to life. That's a compelling concept. Your father apparently loved your sister so much that he was willing to use you as a first draft pincushion body horror experiment to bring her back. You were there for him when she wasn't, but apparently she was just so important and precious that your father carved away your flesh to make her a new body. How can you not resent her after that? Why was she the important one, the one worth loving? What about you was so repulsive that your father could find more connection with a corpse? You hate her. You hate your sister that you never met for all she's done by existing. And then she's here and you somehow hate her even more because it was all true. You really were just a test phase, the experiment, the one not even worth a second try. Or maybe it's the opposite and you warm up to the idea of meeting your dead sister. You aren't Ollie anymore, not really, but maybe that's okay. maybe it was worth it if it lets your sister come back. And look, it worked! You finally get to meet your sibling, the one your father sacrificed everything for. And she hates you. She doesn't know you at all. She's scared of you. She's a child, immature and impulsive and so naive. She doesn't understand the choices you make, the things you need to do to keep the both of you safe. She only knows you when you're an imitation, when you're mimicking the person you used to be. She only loves the part of you that's long dead, and that hurts most of all. And no matter what you do, she just doesn't understand. So the only thing you can do is put her in a nice little glass box and let her watch. Maybe this time she'll start to see the world for what it is. Going in either of these directions could be interesting. Doing a mix of both of these could be interesting. Exploring the prototype's feelings on Poppy and his father in any way whatsoever could be interesting. But instead, we get the same generically evil monologue we've always heard, and when it seems like we might get some insight about what's happening, what we get feels lukewarm and indecisive. The best way I can describe the audio tape for the prototype identity reveal is non-committal. Ollie starts off the tape upset because he feels like Elliot only cares about Poppy. Elliot never actually refutes the point Ollie is making, and yet by the end of the tape he seems like he's calmed down and looking forward to eventually meeting Poppy. The path of their conversation doesn't really follow any logical progression. It just goes where it needs to go because it needs to go there. This sort of ambiguity wouldn't be so bad if it was the start of some plotline, but it never gets resolved or brought up again. Does the prototype hate Poppy? Does he see her as a naive little sibling that he needs to correct? Is he only keeping her around because he doesn't want to be alone in his immortality? I don't know, and this audio recording does nothing to tell you. This chapter doesn't give us a full backstory for the prototype and his motivation. It gives us some crumbs and nothing else. So moments like this, where the prototype completely shatters Poppy's face, feel out of character, but there's no way to prove that they're out of character because the game hasn't actually established their history and relationship. Maybe he actually hated her and was planning on breaking her apart and rebuilding her, but if that's the case, then why did he put her in the glass for so many years? How will breaking her now convince her to join you? Except, based on your reaction, it might have been an accident? I'm not sure how that happened, considering you've had years to get used to this body and how strong it is, but whatever, that's small potatoes compared to everything else. Now, I'm sure that there will be some people who watch this and insist that I'm just not using my brain. They'll say that obviously this tape means that Ollie really cared about his dad, and he's keeping Poppy in the case for Elliot's sake, even though he resents her. Except that there will be other people who insist just as passionately that the tape implies that Ollie sees Poppy as his only companion, and he really wants them to understand each other now that Elliot is gone. It's entirely possible to make assumptions and create a story in your head based on this reveal, but I think it's dishonest to claim that it tells a clear and coherent narrative. Having different interpretations about characters is normal and fun, and if you're just using Poppy Playtime characters as dolls you can put in whatever story you want, that's completely fine. But we shouldn't pretend that this reveal isn't intentionally vague and open-ended. Compared to the prototype, Poppy is in a slightly better position when it comes to characterization. She's had VHS tapes where she talks about not being what people need her to be, and how she's afraid and angry of what people have done to her, and that is a good start. But when it comes to actual person-to-person interactions you have with her, she's usually doing one of three things: crying, asking you to do something for her without really explaining why, or getting kidnapped. She doesn't feel like a character at all, just something we need to go find or follow the orders of. The few times we get to see her express a different emotion, it's actually pretty good. but it's so rare that we get an opportunity to actually interact with her in a way that isn't her just apologizing for the 7th time. Most of her character is only present in the VHS tapes that you can miss, and I just think that that's a poor choice to make. Another aspect of the story that feels undercooked is the fact that the prototype is Ollie. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, which is a problem because I'm pretty sure this has been the plan for a while. The concept of Oliver as a character isn't a bad one, but I don't think they did the proper setup to make his identity as the prototype make sense. Firstly, the prototype has never really struck me as a childlike character. He's been characterized from the beginning as ruthless, cunning, and insanely smart. That doesn't necessarily mean he can't be a child, but the vocabulary he uses and the way that he's always interacted with others made me think that he was quite a bit older, like he knew a lot more than they did and they were all children in comparison to him. You can argue that this might have been that they didn't know what the prototype's identity would be at the start of the game, but if that's the case, I feel like you should make his backstory fit what we knew already, instead of just asking us to accept something that doesn't fit what the story's been hinting at. Secondly, Oliver wasn't set up as an important enough person to be the prototype. Ollie in Chapter 3 was just a name, and he never became anything more than that. Pretty much everyone was immediately suspicious of him because he was just a random child that showed up out of nowhere that we were supposed to trust for some reason. He never explains where he is or how he's alive, and neither does Poppy. And so when he's revealed to be the prototype, you just kinda go, ha, called it, and forget about the name Oliver entirely because he was nobody to you. As far as we knew, Oliver was just a name the prototype borrowed from a random orphan to trick Poppy. It's never implied that Ollie was related to Ludwig, and there's absolutely nothing to connect that name to the body of a young boy mentioned in the Chapter 3 nightmare sequence. No one suspected that Ollie would be the prototype because Ollie wasn't even a real character. Ollie was a thin veneer draped over the prototype that everyone saw through. He didn't exist as a person until this chapter. He barely exists as a person now, with the prototype apparently not even using that name anymore. At the end of Chapter 4, Poppy asks the prototype if there was ever really an Ollie, and the prototype says,
"Yes, there was. But that was a very long time ago."
Which is kind of an impersonal way to talk about who you used to be. Maybe it was written this way because Mob didn't want to give away the twist yet, or maybe it was written this way because the prototype doesn't like to associate with his past, but the way this is phrased kind of makes you dismiss the idea of Ollie from your thoughts completely. Like, yeah, the kid was someone at some point, but he's been dead for a long time, so don't worry about it. It might have been better for the prototype to say something like, "It's not a name I use much anymore," or "There's no need to be upset, Ollie's been gone a long time. Prototype is the one you know." And yeah, maybe that would give the game away and give us the prototype's identity, but you need to do something to tell the audience that Ollie is important. And if you aren't going to explain anything about his backstory, you might as well throw something in here. The best twists are the ones where you look back at the story and you can see the clues that you missed that led up to the reveal. A good reveal isn't just about shocking the audience, it's about looking back and going, "Oh man, I should have seen that coming." Oliver being the prototype could have been an interesting plot point, but he had such a nothing presence up until now that it just ends up being confusing. When it comes to the overall story of this chapter and what bothers me, it really comes down to a lack of buildup as well as a lack of payoff. Everything is just a little less fleshed out than it should be, and it makes for an overall narrative that's shallow and dull. Part of me wants to believe that they're just saving all the depth and complexity for a later chapter, But a much bigger part of me wants to point out that I've been waiting for that depth and complexity for ages now. It's been 5 chapters. What exactly are they waiting for? How long are we supposed to just sit in the mystery before they finally decide that everything should be revealed? It's been so long that I just have a hard time having faith that they'll eventually do something with the ideas that originally intrigued me. Speaking of things that intrigued me but ended up falling short, let's talk about the actual visual design of the prototype, shall we? Now, I don't want to be too aggressive about this point, because Mob Entertainment gave themselves a really difficult task here. They've been building up what the prototype looks like for actual years at this point, so there was no design they could make that would please everyone. That being said, though, I don't think this is a good design for the prototype. As a base design removed from any context, it's good enough, I guess. He looks decently crazed, his size makes him kind of menacing. There's a large percentage of fans that probably go crazy for clown/jester characters. At the very least, he looks pretty fun to draw. But as a design for the prototype, the main villain of Poppy Playtime, I think he falls short by a pretty wide margin. The prototype has remained mostly hidden for the majority of Poppy Playtime, but other chapters have given us some very clear hints about his appearance. As early as chapter 2, the prototype was implied to be some sort of amalgamation. Mommy Longlegs is terrified as she dies, not so much because of the death itself, but because dying means becoming part of the prototype.
What have you done? You make me part of him!
Based on the tone alone, we can assume that this is a fate much worse than death. It's not just that he's going to use pieces of her for something, he's going to make her part of him. This implies that the prototype is some sort of Frankenstein creature, stitched together from the gathered corpses of other monsters, probably absorbing their consciousnesses in the process. The later reveals of his constantly shifting, cobbled-together voice and catnap shrine supported this idea. The prototype was some horrific combination of parts held together to create something from your deepest nightmares.
That shrine? Did it scare you? If you thought that was terrifying, just wait until you see the real thing.
And now, finally, after years of waiting, we get to see the prototype in all his horrible glory. And he's some kind of jester on a crab mech with some differently colored arms stapled to his torso. Well, if nothing else, this tells us something about the prototype. He's clearly suffering from coulrophobia because he assumes that this is the scariest thing imaginable. Look, I'm sorry, I know that this was a difficult task. I have no doubt that there was a ton of debate on what sort of design we'd get, because this is something that's been built up for so long. But is this really the most we could get? This design feels so held back, so tame compared to what was implied. If someone were to look at this design on its own with no context, would they be able to tell that this was an amalgamation of multiple creatures? Absolutely not. Maybe if we're being generous, we could say that they'd think he was some sort of body part collector with the mismatched arms, but there is no way they would ever decide that this was some sort of Frankenstein-esque monster. And I think that's a real problem, because the idea that the prototype was incorporating the previous bosses into himself was one of the most iconic things about him. We weren't sure why he was doing it or what kind of creature he even was, but it was fun and interesting to speculate about, and I was looking forward to seeing what would come of it. And now he's here, and that aspect of him seems to be almost completely gone. I had originally thought that he needed to absorb these toys to remain immortal because Chapter 4 implies that he's having some sort of trouble, but I guess we just have magic immortality soup now, so I don't know what the point of all this body horror was if you weren't gonna do anything with it. There are just a lot of things about this design that confuse me. One of the first things I thought when I saw it was, where did he get that mask from? Because he's supposed to be an amalgamation character, right? So presumably he had to get this permanent smile mask from somewhere, and we have never seen a toy that looks even remotely like this. So I guess maybe he just always looked like that for some reason? Poppy looks like a doll because, presumably, her father saw her as his precious little porcelain girl that needed to be protected. So did Ollie become this because his dad thinks of him as a massive clown? That's not very nice, especially since he has coulrophobia. And one thing that I'm particularly sad about with this design is that it doesn't show in any way how the prototype talks. The prototype's voice is constantly shifting and changing, and I wish there was some aspect of design that showed that off visually. It's a really cool part of his character, and when you look at this revealed design, you'd never be able to guess that that's what he sounded like. For example, why don't you give him multiple heads on his body that each talk in a different voice? This would not only show visually that this is a character that sounds like a lot of different things, but it would imply the fate worse than death that Mommy was so afraid of, with each head twitching to life whenever the prototype wants to use it. Or maybe we could go less jester and more theater in his presentation, with him having multiple masks that he switches between to symbolize his shifting voice and emotions. Or, my personal favorite, give him a cracked porcelain mask of a child's face, with glowing eyes that change color based on how his voice changes. This adds a visual indicator of the changing voice, and it would give the prototype and Poppy some visual similarities, which would help to indicate that the two of them are related to each other. There are so many different things that you could have done for the prototype's design, and it really feels like they just picked the most held back, tame thing they could for no reason. Something I should note is that even though I think this is a bad prototype design, I can still acknowledge that this is an appealing design that a lot of people will like. I have no doubt that this will be an incredibly popular character, because the internet just kind of has a thing for spindly, threatening characters in suits. The people who love Moon from Security Breach will probably love this design just as much, if not more, than that character. And that's fine, you can like what you like. But I think it's important to acknowledge that while this design might be appealing, it's not a good design for the character the prototype was implied to be. I think that in this moment, the game chose to prioritize mass appeal over something that actually made sense for the story. And that makes me very sad. And it also leads into the final point of this video, style with no substance. We've talked at length about how the story in this chapter is thin on the ground. The game is constantly implying a deeper narrative than it's actually willing to share, and the story quality suffers because of it, leaving us at the end of the chapter in the exact same place where we started. So, why is this game still so insanely popular? How does it continue to turn a profit despite not really giving us anything? Well, there are many reasons for that, I'm sure, but the one I'm choosing to focus on right now is the fact that Poppy Playtime does give us something. There is one thing that Poppy Playtime and its sequels are very good at giving us, and that thing is spectacle. Poppy Playtime loves a good spectacle. It loves to do things that are crazy and surprising and cool looking, and it's really fun to watch something like that, both as a player and a YouTube viewer. The first chapter of Poppy was honestly barely anything, but that chase with Huggy was so good and climactic that it carried the franchise into the success it has today. It was the spark that started everything. And ever since then, every chapter has tried to do that again. Every chapter has tried to have a moment, or multiple moments, that completely blow the audience away and get them really excited. The chase with Mommy Longlegs plus her death, Dog Day's possession via smiling critters, Catnap getting electrocuted and lit on fire, Doey getting hydraulic pressed, the prototype reveal, multiple train and vehicle crashes. Every chapter is trying to be bigger and better than the last, introducing new characters and new things to get people hyped. And this is not inherently a bad thing. It's good to strive for more, and it's good to want your audience excited, but this can only take you so far. At a certain point, all these chase scenes and explosions and new villains have to lead somewhere, and that's where I feel that Poppy Playtime has faltered. Because yeah, a lot of these things look really cool, but if they don't ultimately mean anything, then what's the point? I'm going to tell you a little story. Back when I was in high school living with my parents, we bought a new set of kitchen knives from a door-to-door salesman. My mom had been wanting some new knives for a while, and this set was convenient and not too expensive, so we decided to give them a try. And with that knife set, there was a promotional DVD from the company with a bunch of videos demonstrating how strong and durable and sharp their knives were by slicing through big slabs of meat and water bottles in slow motion. And you know, slow motion is pretty fun and cool to watch, so out of curiosity, we sat down to watch a few of the videos. And it was pretty fun at first. As I said, slow motion is cool. Knives are cool. Slicing through things in slow motion with knives is cool. And it was a pretty good time overall. But the thing is, this company made a lot of knives, and there was a slow motion video for every single knife. And the DVD was set to autoplay through every single one of them. A slow motion cut through a water bottle is cool the first time, and it might even be cool the 10th time. But it is not so cool by the 50th. I'm not sure how long we sat there watching these videos, but it felt like an absolute eternity. We probably could have stopped at any point, but we all just kept thinking that surely we were getting to the end of their catalog. Surely they'd run out of knives to introduce eventually, but they never did. There were always more knives to dramatically swing through the air, and eventually we had to admit defeat and turn it off before our eyes fell out from soul-sucking boredom. And as we all left to separate parts of the house, my dad said something that stuck with me in a way I really wasn't expecting it to. Okay, we get it. Your knives are really strong. So what? This little phrase my dad said to express annoyance at what was essentially a bunch of commercials has kind of stuck with me as a shorthand form of media analysis. There is nothing wrong with a piece of media that wants to be flashy. It's fun to see something go all out and do things that are super mega ultra awesome. But part of what makes these flashy moments so cool is the story that leads up to them. Action and changes to the status quo are most effective when they're connected to a story that you're invested in. And if the story has nothing to offer but spectacle, it starts to feel repetitive and dull, no matter how flashy or earth-shattering it's intended to be. Sometimes the whole appeal of something is that flashiness, and there's nothing wrong with that if it's your cup of tea. But when it comes to Poppy Playtime, all this spectacle and fan service is starting to feel like a gimmick that's wearing thin. Each new chapter will introduce a new villain, a new area, a new chase, and once you're done, you never really see these things again. And at a certain point, it starts to feel like a bit of a waste. Like, we get it, your monsters are really cool looking. So what? I know I probably sound like a major buzzkill to some of you right now, and I need to make it clear, I don't inherently have a problem with something being cool just for the sake of it, but anything repeated too much can become boring, and at least for me, Poppy has reached the point where I'm not interested in the next big thing. I just want the game to tell a clear, compelling story, and I'm no longer confident that it will ever decide to do that. It feels like instead of telling a story, the game just tries to distract you with more and more shiny new things, and I'm tired of that feeling. I'm tired of it because it's tiring and because I've felt it before. I see a lot of similarities between Poppy Playtime and Bendy and the Ink Machine, especially in regards to this hype-based method of storytelling. I was a huge fan of Bendy as it was coming out, but when I look back on those memories, I find that a lot of what I enjoyed about that game wasn't actually in the game. I was excited when each new chapter released, sure, but being a fan of Bendy was less about what the game was doing and more about what ideas we could take from the game to play around with. I was obsessed with the fan art, headcanons, and especially the AUs that people would make. The Toon Henry AU, role reversal stories, this Bloodborne crossover that I barely understood because I had no idea what Bloodborne was. Hell Studio, 2D Bendy, Henry and the Ink Machine, Bendy and Buddy, which was actually an offshoot of Henry and the Ink Machine, Little Errand Boy, I could go on. I drew fan art for at least 2 of these AUs before I was medicated or diagnosed with my ADHD. I don't think I'd been able to do that for any other piece of media I'd been interested in up until that point. When I say I was into this game, I mean it. But like I said, the content of the actual Bendy chapters coming out was less important than what the artists I liked were doing with it. Everything added in new chapters of the game was more stuff I was excited to see incorporated into AUs I liked. And when I actually thought about the game itself, all I could feel was excitement. Everything being added felt like a beautiful addition to the lore that could only fuel more creativity. And obviously it was all planned out, because how could you create such a fun and intricate world just by adding random things? Sure, the story had a lot of mystery and holes right now, but by the time the final chapter released, obviously everything was going to make sense and come together in a complete and satisfying way. And then the game ended. And, well, it was definitely an ending, wasn't it? At the time, I wasn't really upset by the way Bendy ended. Probably because, according to this old post I dug up, I apparently just didn't believe that it was a time loop. As time has gone on, though, I've grown to resent the ending a little, because it kind of exposed what the game had been doing the whole time. When I was in the middle of things and excited for what was to come, each new thing felt like another piece of the grand puzzle, something that would help the story come together once all was revealed. But looking back on it now, it feels like they were just adding new things that seemed exciting and deep, without actually having a plan on where the story was going. I have a lot of good memories of Bendy and the Ink Machine, but over time it's become clear that the things I enjoyed about it came almost entirely from the fan base. The deep lore I appreciated was mostly widely agreed upon fandom headcanons that were occasionally inspired by or reinforced by one-off chapter events. Rewatching playthroughs of the game nowadays, it feels surprisingly bare bones without the hype there to support it. So many of the events that seemed so clever at the time now read to me as fan service. And so much of what happens is just fan service. I have a special place in my heart for this game, but if someone new played it today, I think they'd spend the majority of their playthrough wondering what all the fuss was about. I'm not making this section to dunk on Bendy, or to discourage people from just having fun with something they like. I'm bringing all this up because when I look at what Poppy is doing, it feels really familiar. New characters get added that are pretty cool, but also kind of complicate things. The building has descended into the earth, far beyond what would be realistic, but you can just barely remain immersed if you just accept that the world works differently here. things happen that are honestly really confusing. And you kind of just have to brush it aside and hope that it gets explained later. I don't know. It just feels like I've seen this before. Poppy Playtime was a game I really loved. I thought it had a lot of room to grow, and I was excited to see what story it had to tell. I wanted to know what tropes of Mascot horror it would follow and where it would distinguish itself. I showed my husband the ARG tapes while we were dating because I thought they were really effective little pieces of horror and I wanted to share them with someone. But with Chapter 4 and now Chapter 5, I feel really disconnected from the series and I don't feel confident that it'll come together cleanly. I'm not saying it'll end horribly. It'll probably still be an okay experience, but I don't think it'll ever reach the heights that I hoped it would. I originally thought that this chapter was going to be the last one, and I had planned to buy the game and play it through completely, so I could make a bit of a retrospective about how this functioned as a complete experience. Now though, I just don't think I can justify that purchase to myself. I don't think all of these chapters total to over $60 of value, and I don't think the next chapter will make it worth $80 or however much it will cost. Poppy Playtime has a lot of potential, but at this point, I feel like it'll never be anything more than just okay. I would love to be proven wrong about this. I would love it if the game completely knocked it out of the park next chapter and blew my mind and made me regret every negative thing I'd ever said about the game. But I don't really think that'll happen. I hope it does, but I'm not holding my breath. And right now, I think I'm kind of done with Poppy Playtime, at least for a little while. Maybe I'll make a video on Chapter 6 when it comes out, maybe not. But either way, I hope that this series can still bring joy to those who are invested in it, even if I'm not anymore. I'm sorry if this video has been more of a downer than usual. I've just been really sad that something I cared about can't seem to be bothered to make an effort. But even if this property disappointed me, that doesn't mean I can't have hope and get invested in projects still to come. Which brings us to the secret fourth section of this video, Indigo Park. I'll be completely transparent. Part of the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I really didn't want this video to end on such a sad note. I've been really upset the past few days, and I just don't want to sit in that anymore. So I'm going to do my best to focus on the future and how Indigo Park might avoid some of the problems these chapter-by-chapter release games seem to run into. I mean, third time's the charm, right? Okay, but in all seriousness, maybe this is some sort of weird rebound situation with my feelings, but I really want Indigo Park to be good. And I really feel like it can be good. I want just one of these games to have a story that actually does cool things instead of just pretending that it will do cool things eventually. And I feel like this game has that potential. It won't be perfect, but I don't need or expect perfect. I just want to see it improve and grow into something good. The game has the classic first chapter that didn't have a ton going on, but there are a lot of things about the setup that are working in its favor. Because this is set in a theme park, there's really no need to endlessly extend the building into the ground to the point of unreality. Indigo Park, if you're listening, you are allowed one basement level in your game that we must emerge from by the end of the same chapter. And I guess if you want to do something with theme park connecting staff tunnels, that's also fine, but that's it. If, for some reason, Indigo Park has you enter a building and then we just go down into the bowels of the earth forever, I think I might actually just cry. The game has a wide cast of characters to explore. Molly does die at the end of Chapter 1, which is a bit of a shame, but our encounter with Lloyd only ends with him running away, which means that he's still available to use in future chapters, which is something surprisingly rare in these Mascot horror games, and I'm choosing to take it as a good omen. The story and lore also seem interesting thus far. We don't know exactly what the mascots of Indigo Park are yet, but they seem to be actual living beings of flesh and blood, and not in the same way that Poppy's toys are alive. Molly doesn't seem like a warped employee or a child soul or something. She seems like her own creature entirely, created somehow from whole cloth. It's a slight twist on some familiar tropes, and I'm very curious to see where things go. But most importantly, in terms of story, Indigo Park seems to have a plan for the future. It seems to have an idea of what it wants to do. This doesn't guarantee success, obviously. The plan might change or things might not come across well, but the fact that there is one at all is reason to be optimistic. Again, I don't expect it to be perfect, and for the record, I didn't expect Poppy to be perfect either. But I hope that Indigo Park can learn from past indie horror games and take full advantage of the interesting things it has going for it. And as a side note, Indigo Park, if you need or want help with anything, I am more than happy to pitch in. Please, if you need help with anything, I would love to contribute. I can playtest, I can give you story feedback, I can draw you some background stuff. I know you already have, cutouts of your characters, but it matches my style. I can get you anything you want if you ask for it. I'd be excited at any opportunity. Anything I can do to help you succeed, I want to do. Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 wasn't what I wanted it to be, and it wasn't what I needed it to be for me to get reinvested in the series. There are still aspects of the game that I like, but as you've probably gathered from this video, I'm not a fan of the game the way I used to be, and that makes me very sad. But I'm doing my best not to dwell on it too much. There will always be new things to be invested in the future, and I think that someday soon I'll be able to play in the Poppy Playtime sandbox without getting too sad about what could have been. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. As I mentioned, I had a bit of a hard time making it, just because all of my feelings were very close to the surface. But I'm feeling a little bit better now, and now that all the feelings are out of my system, we can hopefully move on to greener pastures. With Indigo Park, I actually streamed my first chapter playthrough a while ago, so if you want to take a look at that, please feel free. And if you'd be interested in me streaming the other chapters as they come out, please let me know. Additionally, if you like what you see and you want to support me, consider joining my Patreon. You can get exclusive updates, behind-the-scenes content, and early access to new videos. And I'd like to take this moment to thank all of my current patrons, including but not limited to Tree, Snick, and Perplexia Sphinx. Thank you all so much for your support. It means the world to me, and it allows me to keep making fun videos without worrying so much about keeping the lights on. And thank you all once again for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!